Carlton was 36 years old, made a steady $51,000 a year as an HVAC technician, and on Christmas morning at 10:17 a.m., he was handed a single, neatly packed duffel bag on the marble floor of his mother-in-law's foyer. The bag was a generic $40 black canvas thing, the kind you buy at a Target. It was jarringly out of place against the gleaming white floors of the $1.1 million Chestnut Hill estate, beneath a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than his 2010 Ford F-150. His wife, Janine, stood beside her mother, Francine, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of cold resolution. She was wearing a $600 silk robe, a stark contrast to the worn Carhartt jacket he'd just taken off. Francine, a woman whose posture was as rigid as her opinions, pushed the bag forward with the toe of her $800 velvet slipper. "It's a gift," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that always set Carlton's teeth on edge. "From all of us." Carlton stared at the bag. He could see the edge of his favorite gray hoodie, the one he wore on weekends, sticking out of the zipper. He could make out the shape of his toothbrush kit. His heart, which had been light with the festive spirit just moments before, began a slow, heavy descent into his stomach. Micah, their 7-year-old son, was in the living room, surrounded by a mountain of brightly wrapped presents, oblivious. Carlton could hear the joyful ripping of paper. "What is this?" Carlton asked, his voice quiet, trying not to alert his son. Janine finally spoke, her words clipped and rehearsed. "It's what's best, Carlton. We're on different paths. We want different things." "Different things?" He looked from his wife to his mother-in-law, the architects of this sudden, brutal eviction. "We have a son. We have a house." Francine let out a short, dismissive laugh. It was a sound he'd heard many times, usually directed at his job, his truck, or the Kensington neighborhood where he'd bought their home. "About the house?" she said, stepping forward. Her face, meticulously maintained by expensive creams and procedures, was a perfect, cruel blank. "Janine and I have handled it. It's for the best. You were holding her back." She nudged the bag again. "Thank us," Francine said, and the words would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life. "Now you can find your level." Find his level. The phrase hung in the air, thick and suffocating. His level was the man who worked 50 hours a week in blistering attics and freezing basements to make the $1,254 mortgage payment on that house. His level was the father who taught his son how to catch a baseball in their small, tidy backyard. His level was the husband who thought he was building a life with the woman, now watching him being discarded like last year's fashion. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He felt a strange, cold calm wash over him. He bent down, his work-stiffened knees cracking in the opulent silence, and picked up the bag. He looked toward the living room, catching a glimpse of Micah's bright, bouncing coils, the red and green beads at the end of his braids clicking softly as he played with a new $150 Lego set. The sight of his son, so happy and unaware, was a physical blow. He couldn't let Micah see this. Not like this. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the crisp December air. He didn't look back. As he walked down the long, heated stone driveway to his truck, he heard the heavy front door click shut behind him, a sound of absolute finality. He had no idea then just how deep their betrayal went. They had no idea what was coming. The facade of their life had been cracking for years, but Carlton, ever the technician, had kept trying to patch it. He believed in fixing things. He believed that if you just put in the work, applied the right tools, you could make anything run smoothly. It was a belief that had served him well in his career, but had made him a fool in his own home. Their life in the Kensington Row home had started with promise. He'd bought the house 2 years before Micah was born. Putting down every cent of his savings, $15,000 he'd scraped together over 5 years of side jobs and relentless overtime. He was the sole name on the mortgage, a point of immense pride for him. The house wasn't grand, just a simple 2-bedroom brick front with a small patch of grass out back, but it was his. It was a foundation. The total purchase price had been $185,000, a fortune to him. In the early days, Janine had seemed happy. She'd spent hours picking out paint colors, a soft gray for the living room and a sunny yellow for the kitchen. They'd spent a weekend assembling a $400 IKEA crib in what would become Micah's room, laughing as they fumbled with the instructions. He remembered the smell of the cheap pizza they ate on the floor of the empty living room the first night, the way her head felt resting on his shoulder. It felt real, but Francine's influence was a slow-acting poison. Her visits became more frequent after Micah was born. She would arrive in her white BMW 3 Series, a $43,000 car, and survey their modest home as if inspecting for rot. Every comment was a carefully veiled insult. "Oh, this little kitchen is cozy," she'd say, running a manicured finger over their $600 laminate countertop. "It must be so challenging to prepare a proper meal here." She'd bring gifts, not for them, but for the house. A single, absurdly expensive $350 Le Creuset pot that looked alien in their simple kitchen, as if to highlight what was missing. Janine began to absorb her mother's discontent. The arguments started over small things, always tied to money and status. Carlton's work clothes became a point of contention. His $35 Dickies pants and steel-toed boots, often smudged with grease or drywall dust, were no longer allowed past the front door. "Can't you at least change in the basement?" she'd snap, eyeing her $1,200 cream-colored sofa from West Elm with terror. "You're going to ruin everything." He tried to explain that the dirt was proof of his work, the very work that paid for the sofa she was so desperate to protect. But she didn't want to hear it. She wanted the life her mother had, without the husband who came with it. She wanted the aesthetic of wealth, even if they couldn't afford the reality. She started buying things on a credit card he didn't know she had. A $2,400 Burberry dress appeared in her closet. "It was on sale," she'd lie, tucking the tag away. She insisted on ordering takeout 3 or 4 times a week from expensive restaurants on DoorDash, $50 or $60 a meal, say letting the healthy groceries he'd bought for $150 at Aldi wilt in the fridge. The contrast between their life and her mother's became a weapon she wielded against him. Weekends were often spent at the Chestnut Hill estate, where Micah would be showered with expensive toys and Janine would bask in the reflected glory of her mother's wealth. Carlton felt like a visitor, an employee on his day off. Francine would hold court, talking about her friends' recent European vacations or the latest charity gala, while Carlton sat quietly, feeling the weight of their silent judgment. One Saturday afternoon, Francine cornered him in the kitchen while Janine was upstairs with Micah. She was polishing a silver tray, a task she surely had staff for, but the act of manual labor seemed to give her a sense of moral authority. "You know," she began, he not looking at him, "Janine has so much potential. She was meant for a different kind of life, a bigger life." "She has a good life," Carlton said, his voice even. "We have a good life." Francine finally stopped polishing and looked at him. Her eyes were cold. "You have a life, Carlton. She has a cage. Don't you see the difference?" He didn't know then that they were already building the key to that cage, forging it behind his back. He just thought it was more of the same. the endless, exhausting campaign to make him feel small. He kept his head down, worked harder, took on more side jobs, hoping that if he could just provide a little more, save a little faster, they would see his worth. He had no idea that his worth, to them, was a liability they were already planning to liquidate. The cruelty escalated in the 6 months leading up to that final Christmas. It was no longer subtle digs or passive-aggressive comments. It was a campaign of open contempt designed to break him down. The outrage accumulated in his chest, a slow-building pressure he didn't know how to release. The fight over the car was a turning point. Janine's 10-year-old Honda Civic was starting to have issues, and Carlton had budgeted around $12,000 to replace it with a reliable used Toyota RAV4. He'd spent weeks researching, finding a perfect 2018 model with low mileage. One Tuesday evening in July at 7:45 p.m., he showed it to her on his laptop. She glanced at the screen for less than a second. "A Toyota? Carlton, are you serious?" Her voice was filled with disgust. "My mother just got a new Range Rover. My friends are driving Audis. Well, you want me to pull up to my mother's house in that?" "It's a safe car, Janine. It's reliable. It's what we can afford," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. He pointed to his budget spreadsheet, the neat columns showing their income, their expenses, the $1,254 mortgage payment, the $400 a month he was trying to put into a college fund for Micah. "I don't want to look at your sad little spreadsheet," she sneered. "I want to live, not just survive." The next day, she came home from a shopping trip with Mother and announced she had put a deposit down on a brand new $55,000 Lexus NX. "Mother is helping with the down payment," she said airily, as if that solved everything. "Helping or paying for it?" Carlton asked, the pressure in his chest tightening. "And what about the monthly payments? They'll be over $800 a month, Janine." "We can't afford that." "I'll figure it out," she said, waving a dismissive hand. The figuring it out apparently involved her taking on a secret part-time job as a receptionist at one of her mother's friends' law firms. She never told him about the job. He only found out because he saw a pay stub that had fallen out of her purse. When he confronted her, she didn't apologize. She got angry. "I have to have my own money because you're too cheap to provide a decent lifestyle for us," she shouted. "I'm embarrassed by you, Carlton. I'm embarrassed by your truck, your job, this stupid little house." The words struck him like a physical blow. He looked at her, at the woman he had loved, and saw a stranger wearing her face, a stranger filled with a corrosive bitterness he couldn't understand. Then came the lies about money. Small at first, then bolder. She'd ask for $300 for Micah's school trip fund, and he'd later see a charge from a high-end salon for the same amount on their joint account statement. She claimed she needed $500 for a professional development course to help with her new job. A week later, he was cleaning out her Lexus and found a receipt from Nordstrom for a $495 Tory Burch handbag stuffed under the seat. Each lie was a small paper cut, and he was bleeding out slowly, wondering why he felt so weak and tired all the time. The public humiliations became more frequent. In September, they attended a birthday party for one of Francine's friends at a lavish country club. Carlton, in his best $250 suit, felt out of place from the moment they arrived. A man in a tailored Brioni suit, probably worth $7,000, asked Carlton what he did for a living. Before he could answer, Francine, who was standing nearby, chimed in with a bright, false smile. "Carlton is in the trades," she said, the words dripping with condescension. "He works with his hands. So, essential." The men around her chuckled politely, and Carlton felt his face burn with shame. Janine just stood there, sipping her champagne, saying nothing. She didn't defend him. She didn't even look at him. On the car ride home, the silence was thick. He finally broke it. "Why does she do that, Janine? Why do you let her talk about me like that?" "Oh, stop being so sensitive," she snapped, staring out the window at the passing mansions of the main line. "It's just how her friends talk. You wouldn't understand." He realized then that she had already left him. Her body was still sitting in the passenger seat of his truck, but her loyalty, her respect, her love, it was all gone. She had chosen her mother's world over theirs. He was just an inconvenient loose end she hadn't figured out how to tie up yet. The final betrayal, the one that led to the packed bag on Christmas morning, was planned in the sterile quiet of that law firm where she worked. He could picture it now. Janine and Francine, heads bent together over a desk, a blank quitclaim deed between them, a document that would erase him from the foundation of the life he had built. They weren't just planning a divorce, they were planning a theft, a complete and total erasure. They didn't just want him gone, they wanted him to leave with nothing, as if he had never been there at all. And the most painful part was that he had never seen it coming. He was too busy trying to fix the leaky faucets of their marriage to notice they were dismantling the very pipes of his life. The discovery came on a cold, rainy night, January 2nd, 8:15 p.m. Carlton's world had been unmoored since Christmas, a week spent in a haze of confusion and pain. He'd been staying on the couch of his friend and co-worker, Dave, telling Micah on their nightly phone calls that he was on a big, out-of-town job. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. Janine hadn't answered a single one of his calls or texts. Finally, he decided he couldn't live in limbo any longer. He needed his work records, his tools, his life. He drove his F-150 through the slick Philadelphia streets back to Kensington, back to the house he was still paying for. Rain lashed against the windshield. He parked in his usual spot, but the spot he'd shoveled out from the snow just 2 weeks earlier. He walked up the 3 concrete steps to his front door, fumbling for his keys. The familiar weight of them in his hand was reassuring. He slid the key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. He tried again, jiggling it. Nothing. It was completely stuck. He frowned, a knot of dread tightening in his gut. Had she changed the locks? He hadn't thought even she would be that cruel, that fast. His heart pounded against his ribs. He pulled out his phone, the screen slick with rain, and Googled 24-hour locksmith Philadelphia. He called the first number. A gruff voice promised to have someone there in 30 minutes. The service call would be $150. Carlton agreed without hesitation. He waited on the small covered porch, shivering, the rain dripping from the awning onto his work boots. The locksmith, a young guy with a weary face, arrived in a beat-up white van. He took one look at the lock, a standard Schlage, and went to work with his tools. After a few minutes of probing and turning, he sighed. "This is a new lock, man," he said, turning to Carlton. "High security. You sure this is your key?" "It's the key I've used for 8 years, Carlton said, his voice tight. The locksmith nodded, then pulled out a tablet. "No problem. Just standard procedure. I gotta verify ownership before I can drill it out. What's the name on the deed?" "Carlton Hayes," he said. The locksmith tapped at the screen. He swiped a few times, his brow furrowed. He looked up from the tablet, then back down again, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He finally looked at Carlton with an expression of pity. You sure about that name?" he asked, hesitant. "The city records database shows the owner of record for this property is a Francine Miller. Transfer was recorded on October 12th. The world tilted. Francine Miller. The name echoed in the cavernous space that had just opened up inside his chest. The rain, the cold, the sound of traffic from the nearby street. It all faded into a dull roar. That's my mother-in-law," Carlton stammered. That's not possible. I'm the one on the mortgage. I bought this house. The locksmith shrugged, his expression apologetic. I don't know what to tell you, man. Records are records. My license is on the line. I can't let you in without permission from the listed owner. I'm sorry. He packed up his tools, collected his $150 fee, and drove away, and leaving Carlton alone on the porch of a house that was no longer his. He stood there for a long time, the rain soaking through his jacket, a cold, deeper than the January air seeping into his bones. He felt nothing and everything all at once. The betrayal was so immense, so audacious. It was almost abstract. They hadn't just kicked him out. They had stolen his home. They had stolen his past and his future, all with a piece of paper. The next morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, he was at the City Hall Records office. He paid the $25 fee for a copy of the deed. His hands trembled as the clerk handed him the document. And there it was, in black and white, a quitclaim deed dated October 12th. It transferred all rights and title for 1245 East Somerset Street from Carlton Hayes and Janine Hayes to Francine Miller. And he stared at the signature line for Carlton Hayes. It was a crude, clumsy forgery. The C was too round, the H too sharp. It was the signature of someone who had seen his name but didn't know the feel of it, the muscle memory of a lifetime of signing checks and documents. He felt a wave of nausea. Below it was Janine's neat, familiar signature, and the notary stamp. It was all there, a complete, legal-looking fiction. The ground had vanished from beneath his feet. He was standing on nothing. The instinct to call Janine, to scream, to demand an explanation, was a roaring fire in his gut. But the cold, methodical part of his brain, the part that could diagnose a faulty compressor or trace a coolant leak, took over. An outburst would solve nothing. It would only show his hand. They underestimated him. They saw him as a simple man who worked with his hands, someone who would get angry, then get lost in the system, and eventually give up. Francine's parting words echoed in his mind. Find your level. They thought his level was victim. He had to prove them wrong. This was the beginning of the long game, the period of playing dumb. It was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. He spent that first night after the discovery in a $75 a night motel off I-95, the smell of stale smoke and disinfectant clinging to the thin blankets. He spread the forged deed and his original closing documents across the stained bedspread. He had the original deed from 2012, showing him as the sole grantee. He had the HUD-1 settlement statement, showing his $15,000 down payment from his personal savings account. He had 8 years of mortgage statements from Wells Fargo, addressed only to him, paid automatically from his checking account. The evidence was all there. They had been sloppy. They had been arrogant. The first lie came the next day. Janine finally answered his call, her voice bored and impatient. What, Carlton? He had to force his voice to sound normal, tired, defeated. Hey, I miss Micah. How is he? He's fine. He's with my mother. We're getting him enrolled in a new school out here. A better school. Each word was a twist of the knife. They were erasing him from his son's life, too. He took a deep breath. Listen, Janine, I'm staying with Dave for a bit. The furnace at the house is acting up. Needs a new heat exchanger. It's going to be a big job. I'll be here for a while. It was a plausible lie. Something an HVAC tech would say. It bought him time. It explained his absence from the house without revealing he knew he was locked out. Whatever, she said. Just have my things sent to my mother's house when you get a chance. The important stuff. Yeah, okay, he said, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. I'll get to it. The second lie was harder. A week later, Janine called him. Her tone was different. It was sickly sweet. Carlton, honey, she began, a tone she hadn't used in years. Mother's financial advisor needs you to sign something. It's just a formality for the house finances. To get a better rate, can I email it to you?" His blood ran cold. They were testing him. They were trying to get him to sign something new, something that might retroactively legitimize their fraud. He had to play along. "Oh, well, yeah? Sure, honey. Send it over. I'll take a look at it when I get a chance. Things are crazy at work." He never opened the email. He let it sit in his inbox, a digital serpent waiting to strike. Every few days, she would text. "Did you look at that document?" He would reply with an excuse. "Sorry, swamped. A big commercial unit went down." Or, "My phone's been acting up. Didn't see the email." Each lie felt like swallowing glass, but it kept them comfortable. It kept them thinking he was oblivious, a harmless problem that had been neatly solved. While he was lying to them, he was moving with quiet precision. He spent his evenings not in front of a TV, but at the public library, using their computers to research real estate fraud and property law in Pennsylvania. He learned about LIS pendants, quiet title actions, and the difference between civil and criminal liability. He compiled every piece of financial evidence he had into a neat, organized binder. Every mortgage statement, every bank transfer, the original closing packet from 2012 with the legitimate notary stamp. He had one more conversation with Janine where he had to feign ignorance. She called to tell him she was coming with a moving truck to get her and Micah's things. "We'll be there Saturday at 10 a.m., she said, not asking, but informing. "Just make sure the door is unlocked." He had to pretend that was fine. "Okay, Janine. I have a job on Saturday, so I won't be there. Just be careful with the walls." He sat in his truck down the street that Saturday, watching the $400 U-Haul truck pull up. He watched as Janine and two movers she'd hired carried out the life they had built together. The West Elm sofa, Micah's little bed, shaped like a race car, the dining table where they had shared so many meals. He didn't feel sadness. He felt a cold, clarifying anger. They were carrying away stolen goods from a crime scene. And they had no idea the forensic evidence was already being cataloged against them. He was no longer just a husband. He was a plaintiff. The first meeting with the lawyer was a significant turning point. It shifted Carlton's mindset from that of a victim to a strategist. On a gray Thursday afternoon in late January, he walked into the offices of D'Angelo and Associates, a small but highly respected firm in Center City. The office was on the 12th floor of a glass tower, a world away from the residential basements and attics he usually inhabited. He had found Ms. D'Angelo through a legal aid referral. Her specialty was real estate fraud, and her online reviews were stellar. When she walked into the conference room, she commanded respect. She was a tall, elegant black woman in her 50s, her graying locks swept up in a sophisticated style. She wore an $800 tailored suit and an expression that was both empathetic and razor-sharp. "Mr. Hayes," she said, shaking his hand firmly, "thank you for coming in. Please tell me what's happened." For the next hour, Carlton laid out the entire story, his voice steady and calm. He didn't let emotion creep in. He presented the facts as if he were diagnosing a complex HVAC system failure. He opened his binder and walked her through the documents, one by one. The original deed, the mortgage statements, the forged quitclaim deed he'd gotten from the city. Ms. D'Angelo listened intently, her pen poised over a yellow legal pad. She didn't interrupt. She let him finish his entire account. When he was done, a heavy silence filled the room. She finally looked up from his documents, her eyes meeting his. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice laced with controlled anger, "what your wife and mother-in-law have done is not just a moral outrage. It is a series of felonies under Pennsylvania law, specifically forgery, a second-degree felony, and fraudulent conveyance of real property." Hearing the cold, legal terms for their betrayal was strangely validating. It wasn't just a family dispute. It was a crime. "So what can we do?" Carlton asked. "We attack on two fronts," she said, her tone shifting into a professional, strategic gear. "The civil front and the criminal front, they are separate, but they will support each other." She broke it down for him. "First, on the civil side, we immediately file a lias pendens against the property. That's a formal notice filed with the county that there's a lawsuit pending involving the title to the house. It's a big red flag. It effectively freezes the property. Your mother-in-law won't be able to sell it, refinance it, or do anything with it until our case is resolved." She continued. "Simultaneously, we file a complaint to quiet title. We are asking the court to issue a declaratory judgment that the quitclaim deed is fraudulent and therefore void. We will present your evidence, your original closing documents, the clear forgery of your signature, and the testimony of a handwriting expert. We will win this, Mr. Hayes. It will take time, but we will win." Then, she turned to the second front. "The criminal side," she said, her expression hardening. "This is where they will truly feel the consequences. I will package our evidence and draft a formal referral to the Economic Crimes Unit of the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. We will hand them a prosecutable case on a silver platter. They love cases like this. Clear evidence, unsympathetic defendants. An assistant district attorney will be assigned, an investigation will be opened, and it is highly likely that your mother-in-law and possibly your wife will face criminal charges." Carlton absorbed the information. The sheer weight of the legal machine he was about to set in motion was daunting. "What does all this cost?" he asked, the practical question grounding him. "My retainer is $5,000, Ms. D'Angelo said directly. "My hourly rate is $450. A case like this through the civil judgment will likely cost between $20,000 and $30,000. However, when we win, we will file for a judgment against Francine Miller, not only for your legal fees, but for damages as well. You will be made whole." He had about $8,000 in his savings. The retainer would take most of it. But it wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. "Okay," he said, nodding, "let's do it." For the next 10 months, Carlton lived a double life. By day, he was an HVAC tech, crawling through dusty spaces, fixing the machinery that kept people comfortable. By night, he was a key player in a complex legal battle. He worked relentlessly, taking every overtime shift, every side job he could find, to pay Ms. D'Angelo's mounting invoices. He lived frugally in a small $900 a month rented room in Fishtown, putting every spare dollar toward the fight. He spoke to Micah every night, the conversations a painful mix of love and evasion. He never spoke ill of Janine. He just told his son that grown-up problems were complicated, but that his love for him was simple and would never, ever change. He and Ms. D'Angelo built their case brick by brick. They hired a forensic handwriting expert for $2,500 who confirmed the signature on the deed was a crude and obvious forgery. They subpoenaed the law firm where Janine worked and found the notary who had stamped the deed. Under deposition, the young paralegal admitted that Janine had brought her the document, already signed, and that she had notarized it without Carlton being present, a massive career-ending breach of protocol. The DA's office took the case. An investigator called Carlton and interviewed him for 2 hours. They were building their own file. The wheels of justice were turning slowly but unstoppably, and all the while, Janine and Francine lived in their bubble of arrogant certainty, celebrating their victory, never knowing the storm that was gathering just over the horizon. Carlton let them believe they had won. The longer they believed it, the more devastating the impact would be when the truth finally arrived. The strike was planned with the precision of a military operation. Ms. D'Angelo had advised patience. Let the DA's office complete their investigation. she had said back in November. Let the civil case progress. The perfect moment to let them know the game is over is when it will cause maximum psychological impact. Carlton knew exactly when that moment would be. Christmas morning. 1 year to the day since they had handed him his life in a duffel bag. The plan was simple. The DA's office had finalized their investigation and were prepared to file charges. The official notification letter, a cold, bureaucratic document detailing the impending criminal case, was ready. Ms. D'Angelo arranged for it to be delivered not by the slow-moving U.S. mail, but by a professional process server. The delivery was scheduled for 9 a.m. Christmas Day. At the same time, the process server would also deliver the summons for the civil suit to quiet title. A 1-2 punch of legal devastation, delivered right to Francine's front door. Christmas morning, 9:03 a.m. Carlton was not at the Chestnut Hill estate. He was in his small rented room in Fishtown, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. He had just finished a FaceTime call with Micah, who was at Francine's. He'd watched his son open the gift he'd sent, a massive $250 Lego Star Destroyer. Micah's face, luminous with joy, was the only thing that mattered. "Thanks, Daddy. It's the best one ever," he had yelled, his voice full of pure, uncomplicated happiness. The call had ended, and now the waiting began. Carlton imagined the scene at the $1.1 million house, the scene he had been replaying in his mind for a year. In Chestnut Hill, the morning was unfolding exactly as Francine had designed it. A light snow was falling, dusting the perfectly manicured hedges. Inside, the great room was a tableau of ostentatious wealth. Citas a 12-foot Fraser fir, Vichin Drasa Croatia Pre-Increase fir, professionally decorated for $2,000, stood gleaming in the corner. Piles of gifts overflowed from beneath it. Janine was unwrapping a $3,000 Chanel handbag. Francine was admiring a new $1,200 Jura espresso machine. Micah was on the floor, already deep into building his Lego ship. The air smelled of expensive coffee and pine needles. It was a picture of perfect, unearned bliss. At precisely 9:04 a.m., the doorbell chimed. Francine looked up, annoyed. "Who could that be on Christmas morning?" she muttered, standing up and smoothing her silk robe. She walked through the grand foyer, the same foyer where she had dismissed Carlton a year ago, and opened the heavy oak door. On the stoop stood a man in a nondescript black parka. He was not smiling. "Francine Miller?" he asked, his voice flat and professional. "Yes," she replied, her tone impatient. "Certified mail for you," the man said, holding out a large, crisp legal envelope and a clipboard. "I need your signature here." Francine scowled, but signed her name with a flourish. The man handed her the envelope, said "Merry Christmas," and walked briskly back down the heated stone path to his car. Francine closed the door, examining the envelope with a frown. It bore the official seal of the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. "Probably a donation request," she said to Janine, who had followed her into the foyer. She tore it open with a manicured nail. She pulled out a single, densely typed page. She began to read. Carlton could picture the words as if he were reading them over her shoulder. R.E. Criminal Investigation, number 7-15-23-984, charges, forgery, 18 Pennsylvania, CS Section 4-101, with theft by deception, 18 Pennsylvania CS Section 3922, fraudulent conveyance of real property. He imagined the change in her face, the slow draining of color, the confident posture deflating like a punctured tire. Her eyes would scan the page, disbelief warring with dawning horror. The legal jargon, the statutes, the official letterhead. It was all undeniable. "Mother, what is it?" Janine asked, stepping closer, a hint of irritation in her voice, at the interruption of her gift opening. Francine couldn't speak. Her hand, holding the letter, began to tremble. She simply held it out to her daughter. Janine took the letter. She read it, her eyes widening. The Chanel bag she had just received lay forgotten on the marble floor. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The perfect Christmas morning had shattered into a million pieces. In the other room, Micah let out a whoop of joy as he successfully attached a wing to his Star Destroyer. The sound of his innocence a brutal counterpoint to the silent, suffocating ruin that had just descended upon his mother and grandmother. At 9:08 a.m., Carlton's phone buzzed. A text from Janine. "What did you do?" He didn't reply. At 9:10 a.m., his phone rang. It was Janine. He let it go to voicemail. The transcript of the message would become evidence in his divorce proceedings. Her voice was a high-pitched shriek. "Carlton, you pick up the phone right now. What is this? What did you do to my mother? You are trying to ruin our lives. After everything we did for you, letting you go so you could be happy? This is how you repay us? You call me back. Now." He saved the message. At 9:15 a.m., another call. Another voicemail. This time, her tone had shifted from anger to panicked justification. "Okay, look, Carlton, there's been a misunderstanding. The house, it was just a financial thing. To protect the asset. It was never meant to be like this. It was just business. You have to call them. Call the DA. Tell them it's a mistake. We can work this out. I'll give you some money. Whatever you want. Just fix this." He saved that message too. At 9:30 a.m., a third voicemail. Pleading. Tears. "Carlton, please. Please, I'm begging you. My mother. They're going to arrest her. She's not built for this. She's an old woman. You can't do this to her. You can't do this to our family. Think of Micah. What will this do to Micah? Please, just call me." He sat in the quiet of his room, listening to the unraveling of their world. He felt no triumph, no joy. He just felt a profound, empty quiet. The pressure that had been building in his chest for a year was finally gone. There was only silence. It was the sound of justice, and it was colder and more final than he could have ever imagined. The consequences cascaded through their lives, swift and merciless. The downfall was not a single event, but a slow, grinding erosion of the wealth, status, and arrogance that had defined them. Every consequence was a direct result of their own actions, a bill for their cruelty finally coming due. For Francine, the public servant at her door, was just the beginning. The criminal charges were filed in late January. The news of a prominent Chestnut Hill socialite being charged with felony forgery and real estate fraud was quiet local news, but it spread like wildfire through her social circle. The friends who once flocked to her lavish parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Her phone fell silent. The humiliation was absolute. The legal battle was ruinously expensive. Her high-powered criminal defense attorney demanded a $75,000 retainer up front and billed at $1,200 per hour. The civil suit brought by Carlton was another front. Ms. D'Angelo was relentless, filing motions and taking depositions that exposed every detail of their scheme. The costs mounted. Within 6 months, Francine's legal fees had surpassed $150,000. Her liquid assets were gone. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the prospect of jail time, Francine accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to a lesser felony charge. She avoided prison but was sentenced to 5 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, WCAMI, and was ordered to pay full restitution to Carlton. This included the $28,500 he had spent on legal fees and an additional $50,000 in punitive damages. To cover the costs, She had to sell the $1.1 million Chestnut Hill estate. After the mortgage and legal bills were paid, she was left with a fraction of her former wealth. She ended up renting a small two-bedroom condo in a generic apartment complex in Conshohocken, a place she once would have sneered at. The grand stage for her life was gone, replaced by beige carpets and popcorn ceilings. Janine's fate was tied to her mother's. The divorce from Carlton was finalized quickly. Armed with the proof of her complicity in the fraud, Ms. D'Angelo ensured the settlement was brutal. Janine was entitled to nothing, no alimony, no share of the house she tried to steal. Her name was on the fraudulent deed, and while the DA chose not to charge her in exchange for her testimony against her mother, the civil court found her equally liable for the damages. Her credit was destroyed. The $55,000 Lexus was repossessed. Without Carlton's income or her mother's fortune, she was adrift. The part-time receptionist job was not enough to support her. She was forced to move into the rented Conshohocken condo with her disgraced mother. The two of them, once united in their snobbery, were now trapped together in a prison of their own making. Janine had to take a full-time job at a Macy's, working in the shoe department for $16 an hour, dealing with rude customers and endless hours on her feet. The $2,400 Burberry dress hung in her new, tiny closet, a bitter reminder of a life she had stolen and lost. And the house on East Somerset Street was the centerpiece of the victory. The court issued a summary judgment declaring the quitclaim deed fraudulent and void ab initio, as if it had never existed. The L.I. pendens was lifted. The title was cleared and recorded solely in Carlton Hayes' name. It was his, free and clear of their taint. The mortgage was still his responsibility, but it felt less like a burden and more like a badge of honor. He had fought for his foundation, and he had won. The quietest but most satisfying consequence was the silence. After that frantic series of voicemails on Christmas morning, Janine never called him again. All communication went through their lawyers. The constant stream of criticism, condescension, and contempt that had been the soundtrack of his life for years was finally over. He had his home back. But more importantly, he had his peace back. 18 months later, on a warm Saturday in June, the sound of a child's laughter echoed up from the basement of the house on East Somerset Street. The basement, once a damp, unfinished space filled with old boxes, was now a bright, warm playroom. Carlton had finished it himself over the winter, putting up drywall, installing a soft, durable laminate floor that cost him $1,200, and painting the walls a cheerful sky blue. Carlton stood at the top of the stairs, a faint smile on his face. He was 40 pounds lighter than he'd been during his marriage, a result of less stress and more home-cooked meals. His HVAC business was thriving. He'd taken the leap and started his own one-man company 6 months ago, and the work was pouring in. He was on track to make over $80,000 this year. All of it his, all of it earned. On the new stainless steel refrigerator in his newly remodeled kitchen, held by a magnet shaped like a wrench, was a drawing from Micah. It was a child's masterpiece of love. Two figures stood in front of a brick house with a bright yellow door. Both figures were drawn with a brown crayon, their deep brown skin glowing. One was big, with neat tight coils on his head. The other was small, with black beads on his braids that seemed to dance on the page. They were both smiling. Below the drawing, in Micah's careful, 7-year-old printing, were the words, "My dad is the best fixer." Carlton reached out and gently touched the drawing. It was his most prized possession. The court orders and legal documents were filed away, but this drawing was the true deed to his new life. It was a life built not on appearances or other people's expectations, but on quiet work, steadfast love, and unshakable integrity. The best part of the new basement wasn't the paint or the floor. It was the HVAC system. Carlton had installed a brand new high-efficiency train unit, a $7,000 system that was top of the line. He'd zoned the house, and in Micah's bedroom upstairs, he had installed a separate digital thermostat. It was a small, professional detail, but to him, it was everything. It meant his son would never be too hot or too cold. It was a quiet promise, delivered through his craft, that he would always provide comfort and safety, that he would always be there to make things right. Micah's room was always set to a perfect 72 degrees. He and Janine had a formal custody arrangement now. He had Micah 4 days a week, and she had him 3. When she came to pick him up, she never got out of her used 2014 Kia Forte. She would text from the curb, and he would walk Micah out. They never spoke. He saw her once, briefly, when she dropped him off. She looked tired. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple department store blouse. There was no hatred in his heart for her anymore. There was nothing. She was just a person he used to know. He learned that true wealth isn't measured by the size of your house or the price of your car. It is measured in peace of mind. It's the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, the sound of your child's laughter filling a home you made safe, the knowledge that you stood up for yourself with dignity and strength. Character is the only asset that can't be forged or stolen, and in the end, it's the only one that truly matters. He had found his level, after all. It was here, in this house with his son. Building a life of authentic warmth and unconditional love. What do you think is the most important thing to fight for when you've been betrayed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you're going through something similar, remember that your integrity is your greatest strength. Thank you for being a part of our community.